we'll try to address, then we will work to address those questions. I see the recording just started, so I'll just back up a little bit. It's great to have everyone here. My name's Matt with Indeed, the Job Search Academy, and I am joined by Allison Madison and Jesse Suarez. Allison from Madison Approach Staffing, and Jesse Suarez with the Westchester Medical Center, I believe, if I have it there correctly. We're here to talk about resume formatting, and we're going to take your questions at the end. All right. So what are we going to do today? Sherry, we'll move on to that next slide, number 4. Today, we're going to talk about 4 primary topics: resume formatting. Let's see, there we go. Resume formatting, resume content, the impact of AI and ATS systems on resume preparation, and how resumes may differ across industries and across different career stages. Now, we know from your questions that not all of the people you work with have access to AI. But that doesn't mean AI isn't impacting the job search process that they're a part of. So we'll try and touch on that from a variety of different perspectives. We're going to take, as I said, many of your questions. So again, bring them on in. Let me know that you have found the chat just by either just dropping in an emoji, a reaction, or letting me know where you're joining us from. I'm joining you from Ventura, California, by the way. So it's a little earlier in my day, but it's a sunny day down here in California. All right. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Anthony. This is wonderful. I see what we want to do is keep you engaged in this, because we want this to be interesting and informative, and we want you to take away from this tools that will be beneficial to you and to all of the job seekers that you serve. Look at them. I see them coming in. Paul's found the reactions. Look, when you hear something that you really agree with, or heck, you might even challenge, use those reactions so we can stay involved. All right. Everyone's had their coffee. Let's dig into this. I want to set the table with a few key messages about resumes that I think are universal. And if we move to the next slide, you will see that the number one is that content is king. Your clients, the customers, the people that you serve, they just need to understand that employers don't inherently understand them, and that their resumes and their online profiles, and these are both really important to maintain, make them understandable, desirable, and ultimately findable. But what they say about their skills and qualifications is what actually gets them interviews. So the content is king. It's not just about filling in information on a form like you're applying for a job. Now, you may be working with some folks who don't actually need to complete a resume. They just need to complete a job application. But filling out a job application and completing a resume are 2 completely different animals. So we're going to touch on that as we get into this. Number 2 is that formatting matters. Sound formatting is so important because a poorly formatted resume will actually prevent the recruiter from getting at the information. If the margins are too wide, if the print's too small, they're going to look at it and go, I'm not even going to pay any attention to this. Because the typical resume gets reviewed for about 6 to 7 seconds before a recruiter makes a decision. Am I going to read on, or am I going to move on? And so the formatting is a pathway to the content. You have great content. If it's poorly formatted, employers and recruiters aren't going to see it. ATS systems might be able to parse it, but the actual human being you want to connect with isn't going to be able to connect with it. But good formatting is not going to save bad content. So these things need to go hand in hand. And the third piece is that one size does not fit all. There is not a single resume format that is going to work well for everyone in every situation. The resume you might need for a healthcare industry, a healthcare position in nursing is different from the one that you're going to need if you're looking to work in a government civil service organization. Might be different than if you're trying to be a teacher, is different if you're an accountant, a software engineer, or a long haul truck driver. So we can't look at this and say, what's the one bit of advice that I can give to everyone that is going to be universal? Just about everything that I and Allison and Jesse will share with you today is going to be situational to the user. So there are no universal answers, and one size does not fit all. All right, that's setting the table for what we're going to do. And you know the topics that we have, you've got a context for the topics that we have. I'd like now to bring my panelists into the conversation and begin by talking a little bit about resume formatting. Okay, so when your customers or the constituents that you serve are creating their online profiles on Indeed, LinkedIn, any other platform that's online, frankly, they don't need to worry about the formatting because our platforms do that. Our platforms are designed to make it easy for that information to land in a company's ATS system It's not about creating a document that's going to look good on a page. And the people that you work with have to worry about both of those things in most instances, making sure that their profile is up to date and online, and that they do have a paper or PDF resume that they can submit via email or push across a desk, whatever it is that they've got. That's where formatting comes in. When they're creating their resume, formatting is crucial. And that well-formatted resume is going to be easy for a recruiter to review, as well as an ATS system to process and parse and get into their online systems. So, and Allison, I'm going to come to you first, and then Jesse, I'm going to come to you. I want to get your opinion on resume formatting. What advice do you have around formatting? What are your typical do's and don'ts when you're advising? And then what are those common mistakes that you are seeing people make? Allison, can I start with you?
Of course, sure.
Wonderful.
Thank you again for having me, and hello to all the friendly faces I see out there in the squares. So as far as resumes, I mean, I would say, I mean, I tend to prefer what I term a hybrid resume, which is meaning that it's a mixture of a skills-based resume and a chronological resume. And the reason why I prefer that sort of a format is that I need to have the compelling information up front. So I generally recommend having that compelling information at the top of the page, because as you pointed out, we're only spending, 5, 6, 7 seconds to determine whether or not I'm going to keep reading further. So having those bullet points at the top really makes it, much more compelling for me to keep reading the chronological part of the resume. Then what I mean by that top, which is the top, whereas the hybrid part, whereas the skills, those things can be depending on what job you're looking for, where you are in your career. But so, for example, if you are in healthcare, and I'm sure Jesse can speak to this more, when certain certifications or schoolwork or what have you, if you're certified, CPR or what have you, if those are required of the job, get those up there up front directly, because I'm making a decision of, are we moving forward or not, really super quick. So I would say really putting that compelling information right up at top. The other piece is keeping things clean. Like, because we are going really fast through these things, having clear, concise sections on the resume, having very clear language on the resume, and not having extraneous things like graphics or pictures. Oops, someone's got their microphone on. Oh. If someone can put themselves on mute.
I think we're good now.
Okay. So, but having, and like I said, so those funky, fonts, people think they're getting, super creative and that they're going to stand out, but oftentimes those things instead are either distracting, or often, as you also pointed out, there's the ATS issue, which is oftentimes excessive graphics or pictures can actually gum up the works when people are importing those resumes.
Allison, I find that's a great point that you're making, because there are a lot of different templates that are out there that are built on tables and charts and that sort of a thing. And those things basically fry the brain of an ATS system, because ATS systems are reading left to right, top to bottom,
up and down
in the US. Yep. That's it. And if the resume is broken up into tables, it reads each table left to right and top to bottom. And that takes information that might have to do with your job title and might place it with the location and put the dates somewhere else. And you upload that into an ATS system and you look at it and you're like, what the heck happened to my resume? Simple as fast, a single resume form, a single column, just use regular old text. Don't go crazy. Oh, and photos don't process at all. And they're, frankly, by the way, you shouldn't include them, because unless you're applying for a job on camera where your appearance for a specific role, it invites bias. And we want to do everything we can to mitigate bias. So, by the way, I was reviewing some of the questions, and one of the questions was, do we put all of that contact information on? Do we put the address on? Do we put our phone? Only put on the information that's necessary for them to reach you, which is really your name, your phone number, your email address, and if it is relevant, your location, and that might just mean city, state. But that's not required on your resume.
Yeah.
They just need to be able to reach out to you. You don't need to be able to, you don't have to give them all of that personal information, because that invites people with bad intentions to try
Yeah.
and find
I
out
would,
more personal information about you. Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that as far as like the obviously street address and that sort of stuff we don't need. But for example, oftentimes, we're trying to source for a location that maybe is a little bit more remote, and and it's hard to get to. So I will often use geolocation on my searches, because I know that trying to get to someplace that doesn't have public transportation and that sort of stuff is challenging. So that's why I do actually encourage people from doing like just city state,
Yeah,
zip code as an alternative, because it helps that
yeah.
geolocation piece. Because there's nothing more frustrating for my candidates. I'll reach out to somebody and they're desperately looking for work, and then they're like, "Oh, but I can't get there." So that
Yeah.
we're trying to make sure that those things also align too.
It's a really good point. I want to pull Jesse into this, but I do want to share. That's why in online systems like ours and others, you have the ability not to necessarily share it publicly, but set in your preferences. I'm willing to do remote work. I'm willing to commute this far from my house. I'm looking for jobs in this specific zip code location, and encouraging folks to do that so that we can reduce the distance between those employers who need candidates, particularly in remote areas, and those candidates that will actually work there. Jesse, I want to get your thoughts on this notion of resume formatting. What are your thoughts, do's and don'ts, and the mistakes that you see?
Sure. I would say almost the same thing as Allison, that the resume should be clear, concise, and easy to read. Um, I also think that location is important, because when we are sourcing, sometimes a lot of the jobs right now, some are hybrid, some are remote, but a lot of them are on site. So being that we are looking at the resume, like you said, about 6, 7 seconds, it's important sometimes to see that the person does live in New York, opposed to seeing someone that lives in North Carolina, because that'll probably just have us move it to the side, maybe for another hybrid or remote job, not on site. I also must say that looking at the job descriptions is very important when you're applying to a job. Also, to tailor your resume accordingly, only because sometimes you see things like someone is applying to a medical assistant job, but they have never touched a patient before, like simple things like that. So it's just very important to read the job description, make sure you qualify, so that your resume actually does get looked at, and not just move to the side because, oh, this requires a bachelor's degree and this person doesn't have it. So they're just going to move it to the side.
You're touching on a point that we hear both from the employer side and from the job seeker side around this notion of the black hole.
Mhm.
Employers, and I'll watch as your heads go, get really, really frustrated when they have to sift through a variety of applications that are not qualified because someone just applied to that job. And they really don't feel terribly interested or compelled to reply to those candidates because they feel as if their time is being wasted. And job seekers get really, really frustrated, particularly as they're seeing more technology coming into the process, that they just apply for more and more and more jobs and then get frustrated that they don't hear back from employers. And so there's
Correct.
that, there's all of the white noise around applications, and then there's the black hole problem that job seekers, and frankly, both sides of the equation need to work on that. Job seekers, to your point, Jesse, should not just be applying randomly to everything just in hopes of getting a job. That's like being a salesperson and opening up the phone book and starting at A and realizing, if you just keep calling, eventually somebody's going to say yes. It's not terribly
Right.
efficient.
Yeah.
You need
Correct.
to apply that same kind of logic to formatting and structuring content that is a part of your resumes. Hey, Sherry put up on the
Absolutely.
screen a moment ago, maybe she'll put it up again here, on some assets, a slide that illustrates some assets from the Department of Labor. And I know we have the URL for that as well. And Sherry, if you can share the URL for those resources, that would be really, really cool. These are some nice, cleanly structured templates. It's the one actually before that, if you would, Sherry, that's showing the resume templates. And we'll get into the planning stuff in a little bit there. There are common sections that resumes should have. Clearly the contact information that needs to be there. Summary statements at the top that give the reader something that they can consume in those first 6 or 7 seconds. Skills section, as Allison said, if the skills of your job are front and center to that job, put those first so a job seeker, an employer can see them. Maybe your education will go first if you're early in your career. If you're not, it will go later in your career. And then your experience and putting your experience in there as well. All of these are the different elements that can be ordered differently. Remember, it's a marketing document. It's meant not to tell the entire story about you. It's meant to tell the story that matters to the people that you're applying for. So there's two things there. You shouldn't just be randomly applying to everything, or candidates shouldn't be just randomly applying to everything. They should spend some time getting some focus so that they can have the various versions of their resumes that they actually need to have, and not feel the need to try and hyper customize every single resume to every single job that they have got. Allison, Jesse, before we move on to the next topic, we can pull those down for right now, Sherry, and then we'll come back to that again in a little bit. But before we move on to the all-important topic of resume content, are there any other formatting bits of advice that you want to share?
I would just, like I said, tell everyone just keep their resumes concise. Actually, like basically to the point, to say it in any other way, just to give us a better clarity of what they're looking for and matching them with jobs that we know they're going to be successful in.
Yeah, and I would pick up on that too, which is, succinct is the word of the day, I think. I mean, like, as much, there are a lot of times I'll have a resume where a person goes on for like a paragraph with something that could have been said in like 2 bullet points. And, if you're keeping that in mind, that it's not a narrative, this is a, concise, and no I statements, those sorts of things. And certainly having an eye to like have everybody in your cousin review it for grammatical errors and layout. I mean, there's so many times where I'll go through and I'll see all these grammatical errors or misspellings or alignments are all out of whack. And that just, to me, is representative, because it's a representation of yourself. And so if you're presenting your resume and it has all these errors and you couldn't take the time to make sure that that representation of yourself is spot on, I think that is an indication of how you're going to present at work. So it's, that's why it matters, right? So it's not just, people being pedantic and nitpicky. It's a representation of how you approach work.
Think about the conflict that a recruiter has when they see a resume that has grammatical errors in it or typographical errors and the like, and you have a candidate saying, well, one of my greatest strengths is my attention to detail. Right. And you're going, oh, really?
Right.
Oh, really?
Exactly. I beg to differ, sir.
Exactly. So here's the other thing where resumes and profiles matter. Employers, particularly for professional roles where a LinkedIn profile or otherwise is going to be important to managing your online brand, they're going to look at your resume and they're going to look at your online profile. And if they don't line up with each other, that's going to cause distrust. They're going to say, which one of these stories is true and why don't they align? So if you're working with clients who are in professions where they need to manage their online professional brand and maintain a profile like a LinkedIn profile, they've got to keep those things lined up with each other. And even if they're using a platform like ours, like Indeed, the information in their profile should line up with the information that is on whatever resume that they might submit in addition to that. Yeah. This takes us to the really important part of this, because all this formatting stuff doesn't matter unless you have something relevant to say. And many people approach writing a resume in the same way they approach filling out a job application. It's just, I need to provide detailed, comprehensive information about my work history, my employers. I drop in the job description because that's going to basically tell everyone what I did. And sidebar on that, think about the job that you do right now, all of us right here. How closely does it really align, the day in, day out stuff that you do that's important, that's impactful, with what's written in your official job description?
Absolutely.
Probably not all that great. But we cut and paste job descriptions into resumes. Well, what a resume is not an application for employment. It's a tool in that process. It's a marketing document. It should not be comprehensive. It should not try to be comprehensive. So if you're working with an older candidate, it's a what have you done for me lately world. Focus on the stuff you've done in the last 5 years. And if I care about that, I might care about what you've done in the past 10 years before that. And does the rest of it even matter? Does the date that you graduated from high school or trade school or college even matter? So it shouldn't be comprehensive. It needs to be focused, as Jesse had mentioned. not a complete overview of your work history. It's a story about the skills, experience, accomplishments, and qualifications that are relevant to the kinds of jobs that you're applying for. My little hack on this is when I'm reviewing a resume with a candidate, I will say, let's say an employer asks you about this bullet, and they say, that's very interesting, and that's quite an accomplishment. How does it relate to the job that you're applying for? With any bit of information on your resume, you have to be ready to answer the question, how is this relevant to the job that I'm applying for? And if you can't answer that question yourself, you can't expect an employer to figure it out. Okay. Your resume needs to be, or a good resume and a strong online profile is a marketing document that's relevant. And it's easier said than done. So, and Jesse, I'm going to come to you first on this one. When it comes to content, how do you advise job seekers on approaching the content of their resume? What are you looking for in content?
I like to see, of course, their name, not necessarily their complete address, but I do like to see the state where they're living. So that narrows down. I also like to see the key bullets with what skills they have, and sometimes their education well, honestly, their education. Sometimes I can see that their education's on the top, then their work experience. Now, what I'm also realizing and coming into conclusion with is that I'm bumping into job seekers that are saying that, oh, I was told not to put all my only to put my past 3 jobs, not all my experience. I disagree with that. I feel that you should have all your job experience on your resume because it does make a difference for the hiring manager when it's time.
See, and what you're learning here is that there are different kinds of advice that are out there from folks.
Yeah.
And that's okay, folks. This is where I went back. There's not one approach to doing this. Different things apply in different circumstances. So you have to present your clients with the options that they have for presenting their information, and then help them present it in a way that's going to be appealing to potential employers.
Right. But again, to your point about like, whether the do or don't I include everything under the sun, right? I'll kind of hybrid those two ideas, which is one, like you were mentioning, Matt, is it relevant to the job that I'm currently applying to, right? And then the other side is, do I have the same title? Like if I kind of had the same role, like in finance or banking, for example, very frequently, like you'll switch banks, but your role has pretty much stayed the same. So you don't necessarily need to like do that, like that the whole blurb for every single bank, right? You could say, just the name of the bank and the dates, that sort of thing to consolidate. But I mean, I tend to feel more a little bit like Jesse, which is I would rather see the total story, because as you were saying, this is a narrative about yourself. You're presenting to a potential employer. This is me. And I think that's why I do like the hybrid resume, which is where you have like the compelling skills alignment piece at the top. And then if you've gotten my attention at that, right, then you've given me reason to keep reading, to go from that 5-second review to the 20-second. I'll keep reading. And if the narrative, which is where I think the chronological piece of the resume is that narrative, right? That's where you're putting in like, your career evolution, like you moved from this role to that role, you grew, you took on more challenges, what have you. That's the narrative piece. So I kind of see this as like a 2-part resume, right? Which is, and that's why I don't want to jump the gun a bit about the idea of having a master resume. I really believe like everyone should have a master resume, and forget about how long it is, have everything under the sun on there and have 1,000, bullet points at the top. And then each time you submit that resume, you pare it down to have those really compelling bullet points at the top that purely align to that job that you're applying for. Because it, again, don't make us as, the recruiters hunt and peck and try and decipher from your resume whether or not you're a good fit for this job. Again, it's that marketing material. I use the cereal box example I think we talked about before, which when you walk down the cereal aisle, right, just by a glance, oh, that's a healthy cereal or that's a kid's cereal, right? That's what a resume should do. At a glance, a recruiter should be able to go yes or no, like right up at top. And then if you want the details, right, if you want to know the nutritional information, you'll pick up the box, right? And you'll keep reading. But like you've got to give that compelling reason out of the gate, so I don't know if that helped with answering that question.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. You went down the cereal path, and I have to say, guilty pleasure, Lucky Charms. Every once in a while, at least once a year, I need to buy a box of Lucky Charms, and I do not look at the nutritional elements on those
You
Lucky
should not.
Charms.
You should not. It ruins the experience.
I just enjoy the guilty part of it. Listen, there's some additional resources that we have. And Sherry, if you want to pull up first the keyword doc, and then we can do the planning doc. Some more resources from DOL. When you're crafting resumes or you're helping people craft resumes, make sure they're focusing on their skills and their accomplishments in describing what it is that they have done and driving those statements with action verbs. We're going to go back, Sherry, to the ones before that, please. The one before that as well, I believe, is going to be, no, I guess it is the planning. I'm sorry about that. There we go. So there's a planning document here that can help people create what I like to call, they're called STAR statements. These accomplishment statements that illustrate the skills that people possess. We've been around this business for a long time. We know what a STAR statement is: situation, task, action, and result. These action verb driven accomplishment statements, when you use those rather than a job description to describe what you've done, you are giving, and your clients are giving potential employers examples of what they have done. And an example of past behavior is a strong predictor of future performance. And far more power, a statement showing something that someone has done in customer service, or what someone has done in being efficient working in a warehouse as a picker packer, or the way they have worked as a travel nurse, or as a long-haul truck driver, or as an accountant. Accomplishments go a lot longer than saying, I'm a really good truck driver, I'm very reliable, I provide great customer service. Those are all opinions. My job is to deliver customer service is a statement that says nothing about you as an individual, and your resume needs to be all about you. So the document that I'm sure we either going to share in the chat, Sherry, I haven't seen if you've been sharing these things in chat, but that might just be me. We can do that here, or we might share them afterwards. Some great documents from DOL with keywords, suggested keywords that individuals can use in crafting their resumes, and then this planning document that you have in there as well. Okay, this is going to be a good transition for us into the next conversation that we're going to have here, which really starts getting into ATS systems, because heck, AI and ATS systems are really, they dominate just about every conversation. And one of the things that they do is look for information. They parse the resumes, which means they take them apart and they turn them into bits of information that their system can read and search to find candidates. And if the skills aren't there, a skill might be a keyword. If the action verb isn't there, that might be a keyword. If the words that you see in the screen, if they're not there, they are not going to be found. So it's important that we sort of jump into that conversation. Many resumes submitted for jobs are first going to be reviewed by AI within ATS systems before they're ever seen by a recruiter or a hiring manager for that matter. And this is particularly true for larger employers that are seeking high volumes of candidates for certain types of roles. It may not be as true for smaller employers, mid-sized employers, or mom and pops who have not invested in large ATS systems to manage their hiring because they don't need to do that much hiring. So Jesse and Allison, I want to come into this conversation around the role and the impact of AI and ATS systems in job search. Because of all of this, there's a huge fear of technology, ATS systems, that they're taking over recruiting and that it's getting harder and harder to get your resume in front of a real person, in front of a real recruiter. That's why so many people are starting to over apply for jobs, and it's sort of clogging the system. So let's talk about the role of AI in resume writing in particular, and how AI systems work, and to see if we can help mitigate some of these fears. So my questions here, ladies, is this: what are some of the right ways and wrong ways individuals can use AI to prepare their resumes? That's question one. And then, what role do ATS systems play in your recruiting processes? And then, generally speaking, from your observation, what do they play? And how do they help identify target candidates? And within your ATS systems, how are you using AI? Allison, can I start with you? And that first question of what are the right ways and the wrong ways to use AI in your resume preparation?
So I think AI can be a great tool, but you can't just like let it do it for you, right? I really think you have to have your individuality and your voice in that process. So I look at it as a two-part thing, right? If you're creating your first resume, I think it really needs to be an iterative process. I don't know how many folks have really used AI tools significantly, but I think that they're very effective if like you go to Claude and you start off with saying, hey, I need to start my write a resume. I don't even know where to begin. Can we have a conversation? Which is weird to say to an AI. However, can we have a conversation? Please ask me questions to find out the information you need to put on a resume, right? And it's actually this iterative process, and it's a little creepy, but very cool, that you can have that. And you can say, hey, say again, if it's in healthcare, well, I started out as a home health aide, and then I got my certification in X, Y, and Z. And you can give that information, and then it can ask you questions. And then once you've had that iterative process, prompt it to say, use the language that I use to describe my job, but format this resume. Explain to it the format that you want. If you have samples, upload the sample resumes, like as far as formatting. There's a lot of ways to use it. But then, as Sherry just put up, once you have your master resume done, as you're applying to jobs, it's very effective. Because remember, I said, like, have that master resume that has everything under the sun. But then when you're applying to the job, you need to revise your resume to reflect it and to align with that. So that way, as you said, when that, when the recruiter is looking at it, it's that cereal box. Yes, that's what I'm looking for. And I want to read the back of the box. So what I suggest is that you upload your master resume and the job description, right? And then you can use this sort of a prompt saying, hey, Claude, we've been, wrote my resume. Now I want to apply this job. Let's revise the resume to highlight my skills and experience in alignment with the job description requirements, right? You guys can read all that. But the bottom part, right, which is do not fabricate or embellish, right? You've got to tell the AIs, throughout this whole process, like, keep it honest and keep it me, right? I mean, that's what the prompts are really doing. Otherwise, they can go rogue and be like, oh, well, this job wants all of this, and they're just going to put all the stuff on your resume, irrespective of whether you've actually done it or not. So it's really important to use those prompts.
Yeah, I like to say AI tools of any kind can offer really, really good first drafts of almost anything, but you've got to then go in and make sure that it's true and make sure that it's you and that it's in your voice. Jesse, on this one of our two questions on the how to use AI, what advice do you have for folks about using AI tools to prepare resumes?
My advice to everyone is that AI is a great resource, but it can also mess you up big time in the sense, like Allison said, AI has to, as weird as it sounds, it has to know who you are because your resume has to match who you are. So if you create this resume with the job description on AI, and let's say you do meet the qualifications now, it's all perfect. Now you're coming into your interview. Now I know that you used AI if it doesn't match what you're saying on your resume because you didn't create it. So it's important to have it in your own words. It's very important to read it to yourself to make sure that you understand your own resume so that you can use it appropriately.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. And if you put nothing in, nothing will come out. Now, when you are sharing information with an AI tool, remove the personally identifiable stuff from your resume because then you're sharing all that information out into the world and allowing those nefarious people who want to find your personal identifiable information and use it, you're giving it to them. So be cautious when you are using those tools, the broader the broader platforms that are out there, the large language models, in terms of what it is that you share. But make sure you're putting good information in and then processing it. Because I've talked to many recruiters who have looked at resumes, and they can tell, lining them up across the table or across the screen, which ones were just created with AI, because they're all drawing from the same pool of information.
Mhm.
And the resumes start looking identical. So if you're trying to use AI to make yourself stand out and you're just using that first draft, you're going to look just like everyone else, and you're going to land in that pile of unaccepted or rejected candidates. Now, on Indeed, we have an AI tool ourselves. It's called Career Scout, that's built into our platform. It's conversational as well, that helps people build their resumes within our secure platform and tries to match it to jobs. So we're working on trying to do that within those platforms, so it makes it really easily accessible to those individuals who may not have access to an AI tool, or just may not have the technological savvy to start writing prompts. That was a fabulous prompt that Allison shared, by the way. And when you get the slides, get that prompt and share that. We've done some workshops on the topic as well. But use it like any other tool. Use it cautiously. And to move into the Marvel universe for a second and channel Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And AI tools give a great deal of power that need to be used responsibly. I want to, just to give folks a little insight now, Allison and Jesse, I want to move into that second part of the question. And to the extent that you can you share how your companies are using your ATS systems and AI tools within them to find candidates and move them through the process? Allison, can I start with you on that one?
Sure. I mean, maybe I may be old school a little bit. I tend to try to put human eyeballs on as much as possible, and not using automated tools. I mean, there are certain, different, job boards, they do have what they call like knockout questions, that we will certainly implement. But those are things like, for example, like as I talked about, like say it's a remote location, and I'll put that as, hey, this is a location without public transportation. Can you get there, right? And if the person, but that's in that application process. I know that there are platforms that do have those screening tools, and there are certainly, and again, I would agree with you, like you said before. I think a lot of the larger organizations are using applicant tracking programs that do have screening tools, and I don't want to name call, but there's certain, applicant tracking systems that do. You can program them and say, hey, we only want people with X number, with these things, and that eyeballs never even get on those resumes that don't hit those markers. But I think those are, like I said, more larger scale organizations, because they're dealing with volume. And, as we talked about I think part of the issue is, it's the goal of a lot of technology is to make this like frictionless experience for users on both sides. But, I would argue we probably need a little more friction, because those one click, applies. I'll use the job title, for example, developer, right? So if someone's a developer, a lot of people think, IT, right? Software developers. Well, there's also a lot of developers in, nonprofit world, right? They're developers, in doing fundraising, right? Can't tell you how many times you get the one-click apply from, you're working on a fundraising job and you get all these IT applicants, right? And so, and I think that is something that we all need to learn, which is, pay attention to those details, and, and take the time. And so I think it goes both ways. It's just that self-fulfilling thing. So the more that applicants are being more diligent about applying to things that really are alignment, then I think recruiters then will have the opportunity to actually put eyeballs on authentic resumes. But right now we're bombarded with things that are so misaligned that, that oftentimes recruiters can't get eyeballs on it, because they just are being inundated. Yeah. So I don't know if that, again, if that answers the question, but like the AI is a
good example that says you need to understand the kind of employers that you're applying to and the kind of organizations that you're working with, because not in the same way that not every resume works in every situation, not all employers source candidates in the exact same way.
Correct.
And that we need, as job seekers, to exercise discernment, so we're not exacerbating the problem by applying to all of those different jobs that don't match who we are, just because we think we are trying to be really, really efficient. Jesse, any insights on how your organization is using your ATS system to identify candidates, and to the extent you're using any AI tools within that to help you be more efficient in that process?
So I must say that we're still a little bit on the old school side, although we're moving onto Workday, which is actually pretty awesome, being that the employees themselves will be able to kind of create this whole Workday situation. And I think that when that happens, AI is definitely going to be something that we're going to be using for sure, but also is going to be able to kind of narrow down those candidates as far as qualifications and things like that. But as of right now, we're still looking at applications and looking to see what the things that we're looking for as employers
That's cool.
are.
By the way, I'm loving seeing some of the comments that are coming in. Anthony reinforcing the notion of quality over quantity being the way to go. And when it comes to customizing resumes, and who do we have there? Very happy to see that their practices. Oh, Anthony again, that his practices were reinforced, Allison, with the prompt that he's doing similar things. So it's always good when you see folks who are doing things that are similar to others. Hey, we're going to jump into our fourth topic here really quickly, but before I do that, Sherry, can you pull up that slide that talks about the research we recently did with Harris Poll, looking at resumes? There were some questions, and there's been some conversation about how many resumes should I have. We actually asked this question of job seekers: how many resumes do you have? And this might surprise you that according to this poll, which we just did, I believe it was in April, only 5% of people said that they have more than 5 versions of their resume. Over a third of only one version of their resume, roughly half, around 49%, have 2 to 3 versions of their resume. When we do our monthly Ask a Career Strategist coaching session, we always get this question: should I hyper customize my resume for every single job that I apply for? And there are various different opinions on that. We want to know what people are actually doing. And frankly, most people aren't. What they are doing, I think, is what Allison had suggested, is having that one mother sauce resume that has all of the things that you can draw from, and then finding what you need to apply to specific jobs. And then when I am advising folks, I will very typically say, if you find yourself needing to completely revamp your resume for every job that you're applying for, you might want to reevaluate your search strategy, because you're trying to be too many different things to too many different kinds of people. And maybe you're not having success because you're spreading yourself too thin, thinking that the more people that I talk to, the better off I will be. That notion of I'll do anything really says I haven't spent any time articulating what I offer and what I want to do, and I'm expecting employers to figure that out for me. And spoiler alert, they're not gonna. Thanks for sharing that, Sherry. I thought that was a really interesting bit of information. So our last topic before we move on into questions is this notion of how different resumes matter for different types of organizations. And like jobs, resumes are not one size fit all, and neither are jobs. A resume that might be perfect for an accounting job, that might not be really good for a new graduate, might not be perfect for an advertising major getting ready to graduate. A resume that works well for a CNA or a registered nurse may not work well for a customer services representative or an account executive. And one that works well when you're applying for a job with a large corporation may not work as well as one for a small business, a not-for-profit, or a government agency. And the resume that someone uses to find an entry-level job will be different from the one that they use later in their career, or to change from one career to another. So I want to talk about that for a second. The different approaches that people may need to take depending upon the industry or the type of job they're pursuing and where they are in their career, early stage, mid stage, or late stage. And job seekers may need to have multiple resumes that are tailored to that, on that question. So, Allison, I want to come to you on this one first. This notion of different types of resumes, new grad gaps, what have you. Talk about this topic and the advice that you have for folks.
Well, it's just kind of what you touched on, which is that, you have to know your audience. Like, let's go back to that cereal box aisle, right? You have to know who you're appealing to. And like I actually had a recent, a kid who was recently out of school. I think he had a couple of summer jobs and literally sent me like a 4-page resume and like detailed every single thing he did as that lifeguard. Do you know what I mean? Like to like pulling out all the pads and, winding up the ropes. That's like for someone who's literally just come out of school, unnecessary and like it's just kind of, I mean, I hate to say silly, but like good effort, a good, really diligent effort on his part, but very, but his education was buried at the bottom of the 4 pages, so I had to figure out like, what is this, like, what is this like, and I'm probably the exception. Most people are not going to go through the 4 pages to figure this out, right? Because again, I'm an old school recruiter, so like in that case, if you're coming out of school, education needs to be up top because that's what you're bringing to the table is your education. If and then I call it, in this case, participation does matter, right? Things that have influenced you, like, so did you volunteer? Did you play sports? Did were you in clubs? And you don't have to go into like mega detail, but it gives it an indication of the person. Again, this is your narrative, your story. You're telling the world on a page, hey, who I am and what I bring to the table. So those sorts of things matter, and again, with a kid, who's coming out of school, like, hey, okay, well, you volunteer for this, but what did you learn from it? What skills did you take away from that volunteer experience, right? So those are the things. And then I wanted to kind of also address, I know the gap issue is also.
Yeah, that was a question that came up. How do we address gaps in resumes or gaps in our career on our resume?
Yeah, and I say like fill in the gap, frankly, because anytime that there's a question, is you're going to be put in that maybe pile, and if there are 20 solid candidates, we're never getting back to that maybe pile. So address the gap. So if you were out for 2-3 years taking care of an ill family member, put it in there. Like just say, hey, this is what I was doing at that point. Because again, to me, I think anytime there's a doubt, you get put on the maybe. So address the doubt. And I think there's also the sense of, or you need to have alignment too, like about the culture and who you are, and an organization that would potentially frown on the fact that you took time away from work to take care of a family member. Is that the organization that you want to work for if that is within your ethos and your belief system, right? So there's also that self-selection process too, which is, you're at the end of the day, it's not just skills, it's also alignment on that fit and that culture and that personality and those things too. And if you express those things, like basically if you say, I took care of my ailing parent for 2 years, that says a lot about who you are as a person too. And you want, the employer who's reading that, who values that also.
Yeah. Your resume is telling a story. And to your point, if you are in school or about to come out of school, the educational program that you're in is your job by and large. That provides the context for your current experience. So you lead with your education. Once you're out in the workplace, the role that you are in provides the context for your current qualifications. You lead with your experience and your education gets pushed back even further into your resume. Maybe after your skills, maybe before your skills, but it takes a second place to your experience because it's that's providing the context. And then this is the question we get is, oh my gosh, how do I explain gaps? How do I explain a gap that I have been out of the workforce? And I think that this crazy little thing that I think a few of us might have experienced a couple of years ago called, oh gosh, what was it called? Oh yeah, COVID. That thing, that put a lot of gaps into a lot of people's careers. Yeah. And the layoffs that have taken place recently in the tech sector a lot, but I mean, in a lot of industries over the years, it's amazing. A lot more people have gaps in their careers than you think when you have a gap in your career and you think it's this big giant blight on your qualifications. And that's just not the case. But Allison, to your point, you've got to be ready to have that conversation, regardless of how that gap came. If it came because you were being a caregiver, if it came because potentially, and this is with some of the people we serve, because of a period of incarceration, you've got to be ready to have those conversations, the ones you want to have, as well as the ones that are important that are going to make you maybe a little bit uncomfortable. Jesse, I want to get you in on a conversation like this when it comes to multiple resumes, resume formats in different types of industries. What are some of your thoughts here?
I have to agree with everything both you and Allison said in regards to when you're first coming out of school and as your journey goes. Your first resume, it's not going to be the last resume. Your resume is going to grow according to your journey and your career. You don't need to, like she said, you don't need to put every single thing you did as a lifeguard. We obviously know that you were a lifeguard, so we're going to look at some key points and move on. So I definitely agree with that. But also tailoring it and knowing the organization that you're applying to. Yes, this is a trauma one hospital, but what kind of employees might we be looking for in a trauma one hospital? Things like that. It's just a lot of research I think you need to do when you're also doing a resume.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background, but he's getting a little feisty because it's early in the morning. I hope it's not disturbing this too much.
No, maybe not.
This is really important stuff. And Jesse, I know in some of the books that we were talking about early career candidates, making sure you're telling the story of the things that you've done. I remember working with a student back in the day when I was working at the University of Texas, and she was lamenting the fact that she really hadn't done all of that much while she was in school, and that she had just been involved in her sorority, and her goal was to be an event planner, and that was all she had on a very, very thin resume. And I said, "Tell me about what you did here in your sorority." And she proceeds to tell me how that over the course of 2 years, she planned and managed 2 events per year, large events, where she had to marshal a lot of volunteers from across her sorority, work with a non-for-profit, contract a band, contact an event, an event company, and raise money. And over the course of those 2 years, they raised like $50,000. And I said, I thought you didn't have any experience in that planning. I said, well, that's just in my story. That's real experience. That's real experience. So I'm going to let him out really quickly, but I want to let you, let's have this conversation on experience.
Yeah. But if I just want to backtrack for just a second, on the explanation too, because I also think context matters on resumes. And one of the things that I appreciate on a resume is, one, like if there have been rapid succession of changing jobs, an explanation. So if it is a reduction in force, if there's been things like reasons why, I left this job to take this job, and then they, had a riff, like that's not, you being flaky. It is, you're part of your circumstances, right? And I think that's important to highlight. And again, it alleviates those questions or those doubts, or any question. And then also, sometimes, people work for organizations that we don't all know. Jesse, you're fortunate, like Westchester Medical Center, if someone worked for you guys, everybody knows Westchester Medical Center. But if you worked for, Acme Company, oftentimes people don't know what industry it is, the size of the organization, all those sorts of things. So a project manager at, a small mom and pop marketing firm is very, very different than, say, a project manager in, at, the helicopter company. I'm trying not to use company names, but, but there's different,
Right.
different levels of experience. So even though titles, again, I struggle with titles because titles are often arbitrary. I would say at certain banking institutions, everybody's a vice president, right? I mean, there's thousands of them. So what does the value of that title really hold anymore? So again, titles are often arbitrary. So again, providing context about the organization that you are doing that work for sometimes helps give context to that title.
Allison, I'm glad you bring that up, this notion of titles, because titles are important to help you be understood. And the official title that you have been given within your organization, within the HRIS system, may not be very indicative of the work that you actually do. So
Absolutely.
use the title or create a title that describes what you actually did in a way that is relevant and that ATS systems will understand. Okay. Calling yourself a recruitment Jedi is not a real title. Calling yourself, recruitment specialist level 4 doesn't really mean all that much. But senior recruitment specialist, concentration healthcare, that may not be your official title, but it certainly tells people what it is that you did.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Now, we're gonna move into questions here really, really quickly, and I'll start with some of the questions that you have shared earlier. But I encourage you to share questions that you have of the three of us in the chat right now, and then we will pull some of those questions out. one of the things that I'm doing on a regular basis when coaching job seekers and doing some of our webinars is I'm leaning into a key theme, and it's this. I think every worker should always be ready to seize on opportunity when it presents itself and respond to adversity when it rears its ugly head. Because both of these things are bound to happen to all of us at multiple times over the course of our careers. What do I mean by that? Seize on opportunity. You meet someone at an event, a local event, a networking event, and who's known you for a little bit, you've known each other, and they come up to you and they go, hey, Allison, I don't know if you're happy where you are right now, but I'm going to be hiring, and gosh, I could sure use somebody like you. I'd love to see your resume if you'd share it with me. This happens, and when this happens, feels really good. It feels really good only for a second, though, if you go home and realize, oh my God, it's been a year or two since I worked on my resume. I got to brush this thing up. And then life gets in the way and work gets in the way and weeks go by and you've missed that opportunity because you weren't prepared to share your resume. And then when adversity strikes, the next worst time to start writing your resume is the day you get laid off because you're under the stress of now not having a job and trying to recall all the stuff that you want to do. So my advice is that your resume, I loved Anthony's comment that resume is a living document. Your resume should really never be more than 3 to 6 months old. And I say that to everyone on this call and to everyone who is a job seeker. We need to lead by example and do that as well. When we're getting ready for a performance review, start thinking every 6 months or so, what have I done in the past 6 months that a potential employer might want to know about? And that might be my own potential employer. That might be for a promotion within my organization. And make sure you're updating your resume and your online profile with that information so that it's always ready when the opportunity, internally or externally, presents itself, or unfortunately, when sometimes adversity strikes.
So Matt, Bob, asked the question how important LinkedIn is, and you had spoken about the fact that your online profile needs to sync up to your resume and that it is important.
He sure does. Thanks, Bob. Bob, it's good to see you again. We did a program together a couple of years ago. I remember up with the Career Center. So it's good to see you. I love the question, Bob. I'm going to broaden your question a little bit and say, how important are online profiles like your Indeed profile and your LinkedIn profile in relation to your resume? I think they're critically important, by the way. And just to give you a little statistic, according to ComScore, who measures this stuff online, 82% of online job seekers in the US use Indeed and 54% use LinkedIn. Okay, that's not a jab at LinkedIn, by the way. That's just an observation that LinkedIn largely serves a professional workforce, the professional workforce, and we serve that workforce and everybody else. So whether you're using LinkedIn or Indeed or using LinkedIn and Indeed, I'd probably recommend us or both, depending upon the industry that the people that you're working with are in. I think they're critically important because, as I said earlier, they are going to look at your resume and look at your online profiles, and if they don't align with each other, they're going to wonder which is true. So that can cause distrust. And if you wish to be found as a passive candidate, having an online profile on Indeed and or on LinkedIn is really important with the most current information because they can't find you if you're not findable. So I think it's really, really important. And that's my opinion, at least. Allison and Jesse, for the roles that you fill, how important are the online profiles in sites like Indeed and sites like LinkedIn?
For me, I actually really do. I use Indeed more than LinkedIn. I feel that with Indeed, I'm able to source for harder to find positions. And how do I say, so we were struggling with LPNs, for example. I feel like I got more candidates sourcing through Indeed other than LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is also a great platform. You just have to know when to use them. That's the best advice I can say.
And I really kind of like what you said. That sort of goes into industries. My daughter is a nurse. She's an oncology nurse in Montana. She has a LinkedIn profile. She doesn't use it all that much.
Correct.
Because she's not worried about managing her online brand. And she's not worrying about managing her relationships in that way. Again, it's not a dig at LinkedIn. It's an observation about the industry that she is in. So with everything, it depends.
Yeah,
Allison,
I would
anything
agree
that
with
you would
that.
share in that?
I mean, I think yes. I mean, I think it's very much LinkedIn is much more for professionals, than it is for like you said, health, healthcare. If they're like clinical healthcare, not really on there. Trades are generally not on there. But in professional services, nonprofits, there's huge sectors that's probably the principal place where they're going to do search because if you're recruiting again also for senior leadership, if you're recruiting for director levels or above, they're not one, they're usually employed, and two, they're not searching, for job boards. Recruiters are actively pursuing them. The senior leadership thing. So it's very very different. Like there is no single recruiting process. And every place is different. Again, if you're in the trades, that's a totally different
Gosh, yes.
recruiting process too. Because again, a lot of that is driven by certifications or training, and so there's all these nuances to it. So it's hard to make these broad brushstroke statements about your job search or a resume when every single sector and stage in your career are very very different.
So whenever I hire a new career coach, I give them this coffee mug. I see if I can get it up to the camera. Basically,
depends.
the coffee mug says, it depends. Oops, I've got my background on so you can't see it all that well, but it basically says, it depends, because the answer to almost any question someone might ask is, it depends. Now, there are a couple of questions that are in the chat right now, but as Sherry said, you can come off mute, and I would encourage you to use the raise your hand tool if you want to ask a specific question. But I'm going to come to Sherry's question first. And this one will be for Allison and Jesse. Do you recommend titling each resume to match the job you're applying to every time? And she's curious about approximately what percentage of applications you receive are not good or valid.
I would say about 50% is the 50-50 catch all the time with the amount of candidates that I get in my pool. So usually a 50-50 catch.
What about titling the resume?
Titling the resume, I don't find it it depends. It all depends. So it's like if, for example, I've been here since I was 18. I've been here for 20 years. So my career has changed, and I do have to put in the key points that I did do OR scheduling, or that I was a supervisor in gastroenterology, and specifically in gastroenterology because it's tailored differently than every other department. So those things really matter.
I will say this, when it comes simply to titling the document itself, that matters. Because if you just call your document resume, everyone might call their thing that, use your name in the and my recommendation is use your name or your first initial and last name and the date of it, because that's going to help you manage it too, because you'll know which version. Because you might submit a resume and some time might go by, because this happens sometimes before someone before they come back to you, and you may have new accomplishments that you wish to share. And then when you visit with them in person, you have an updated resume with a new date on it. You can say, I'd like to give you the most current version because there have been changes and I have new accomplishments since the resume that I sent you, which begs the question, oh, really? What accomplishments are those as well? So yes, I think titling of the document itself is important for document management purposes for you, as well as for the recruiter as well.
So, and just to pick up on the resume, the titling piece, definitely need to have your name, but I think the resume titles or naming of the document is more relevant when you're emailing a resume. If a company is not using a job board, then or if they're using their own job board, then the title of the resume or the name of the document matters a lot, because again, like I can think of a nonprofit that does it, and they don't have an ATS. A large organization, and they don't have an ATS, and so the recruiter is literally downloading all of the resumes and then putting them into a file, right? So if she downloads it and then was like, oh shoot, I forgot to rename the thing that was called resume to the person's name, now it's lost and she's hunting and finding it. So absolutely, I think naming, having your name on it I would agree with Matt, date, and then even title, because again, so oftentimes for those recruiters that are not using ATS and still taking, emails of resumes, you're making their life simpler, right? And so, and I think that's also part of the process too, is that again, you're presenting yourself, what are you going to look like when you get that job? Are you thinking in advance? Are you, being courteous? Because that to me is like a courteous thing, right? Is like, I'm going to help that person's life be a little bit easier. I'm not going to make them rename the name of my document, right? So it's having that, all of those little tells, and I'll tell a bit of story if you'll indulge me for a second. But
Please.
when I was, before we were in remote land, right, I deliberately had my desk situated so that I could see the front office, right? And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to see how the person presented when they walked in. What was their, exchange with my receptionist? Like were they kind and courteous to that person, or were they disrespectful because they deemed her like just the receptionist, right? So there are those little tells, and it's the same thing with application process. I use my process as a screening tool. How quickly do they get back? How quickly do they respond? Do they fill out all the questions on the initial application, or do they just go, see my resume, right? Like, there are these tells, about how a person's going to present at work. And I think, that's also as coaches, because that's what you guys are doing, is really coaching your career. And especially those early career folks. I would hope that someone who's got 20, 30 years, they would know better, but not always. But like coaching those individuals to say like, those little things matter, how you write that resume. Every interaction is being, either consciously or subconsciously kind of tallied, and they all matter.
There's that old line that says, treat others the way you wish to be treated, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You're asking an employer to invest time in getting to know you. You need to invest time in making it easy for them to get to know you by doing those little things. And Allison, I would do the exact same thing in my office. The interview began the minute someone walked in the office, and once they left, the first thing we asked was our receptionist, whoever it was at the front desk, because I worked at a university, sometimes it was student workers. It's like, how did they act in the reception area while they were waiting? How did they treat you? Did they treat you with respect? And that's where the interview began. I actually knew a guy who specifically put certain magazines. He would put a couple of different magazines and the company's annual report. So he'd have like the company's annual report, a Sports Illustrated, and a People magazine. Because he wanted to know, coming into the interview, what did that person pick up and read?
So Allison, can you talk about the employer's point of view and the objective statement? Because I know you have an opinion on that. I think a lot of times people don't think from an employer point of view, and they think that their goals are important to the employer.
Right. So yes, definitely I would say my pet peeve is your objective, your career objective has no bearing on the job. So like when people will say like, my objective is to work for a company where I can learn and grow, and it's, that's my immediate, like, I just roll my eyes. Cause I've said, I'm sure Sherry, anyone who knows me has heard me probably say it 1,000 times, which is, companies hire people for one of only really 3 reasons. And that's to make money, save money, or impact the bottom line or mission. Like, that's it. I threw in the mission for your benefit, Matt. But that's really the only 3 reasons why organizations are hiring people. And that's important. So your objective, while yes, your career is for you, at the end of the day, between 9 and 5, your objective needs to be moving the needle for that organization. And that's what the resume has to show is, what you have done and what you can do at the job that you're applying to. Like that's all that needs to be on there.
Amen, sister. Amen. Objective statements have because a resume is an I offer document, not an I want document. And an objective is an I want statement. Mm-hmm. A summary statement is an I offer statement. Having your functional title at the top of your resume to define who you are is a positioning statement, but objective statements have no place. Or Jesse, do you perhaps disagree with us? Because there are different perspectives on this.
No, I completely agree. I
Cool.
completely agree. We still have to keep reading past that.
I don't even read them anymore. I just like,
Right. I know
So,
exactly what you mean.
so we had a question come in. We had a question come in from Kimberly Morella, and in full transparency, Kimberly and I go way back. We went to college together at SUNY Oswego many, many moons ago. So Kimberly, it's great to have you here on the call. Her question is, in general, if someone has a resume with multiple positions, various fields, does it help or hurt to provide all of those positions on Indeed or other services? So one, thank you for the question. Because I've heard us, and we even use this language ourselves sometimes, job boards. Job boards is a very historical term that dates, that is really, really connected to when the original job boards in the Internet 1.0 world replicated what used to be classified ads in the newspaper, paralleled them.
I remember classifieds. Okay,
yeah,
that's how old I am.
When I was working in the staffing industry many years, I remember getting my Sunday ads ready every year for doing all of that. And that's what job boards are, is a place where employers can post jobs and whoever pays the most ends up on top. And then they try and find jobs, and employers, job seekers can go in and try and find those. What Indeed is, and I think more of the other platforms are matching, search and matching platforms. We're a lot more like a Google than we are like a Monster in that regard. Because everyone's search results on Indeed are unique to them and are a product of multiple things. The preferences that you list in your profile, the skills, the experience, and the education you put in your profile, and then your search behavior, the search terms you use, the locations where you look, and when you search, the things you actually interact with and the stuff you ignore. So if you ignore stuff, we're going to show you less and less of it. If you interact with certain types of jobs, we're going to show you more and more and more of those different kinds of jobs, because the ultimate goal is to only present to you stuff that you're going to want to see, in the same way that Amazon presents to you stuff they think you're going to want to buy based upon purchases that you've made in the past, or Netflix recommends movies to you because based upon stuff that you've viewed in the past. So in our world, relevancy is key, because we are just a job search engine. If you're in a world like LinkedIn that has a different purpose, on some levels similar, because they do have a job board component to it, but it's an online professional networking platform where you want to tell the story about your professional work history, your professional brand, perhaps in a more comprehensive way. So relevancy is important on Indeed. Currency is important. Completedness is not. Whereas on other platforms, it might be a little bit different. So that's why it's important, I think, to maintain your profiles, and then also know that you need to maintain that resume, because that resume is that point in time artifact, or that slice of your profile of who you are that you're presenting to a specific employer. Thanks for that question. It allowed me to share a little bit of Indeed information, but I bet we have other questions that are here as well that Allison and Jesse can answer.
I can want to go back to Kimberly's question though, to answer as far as if you have very divergent experience, I tend to so you have 3 different types of careers or experience, right? Have 3 separate resumes that focus on those 3, but I would absolutely retain it, because you never know where those intersections happen, right? So maybe you have experience in the arts, and then you have experience in nonprofits, and then you have experience in sales. I mean, just totally divert. I don't know, whatever, IT sales. So, but the fact that you have experience in arts, maybe this IT company, they focus on doing software programs that specialize in one of their big sectors is in arts and nonprofit. So absolutely, have that. You can put it under other experience or however you want to put it. But because we are so very technology reliant and using those keywords and those sorts of things, you will populate because you have both IT, sales, and arts, right? So those, so the more, again, this is trying to give yourself the opportunity to show this is all of me, right? This is your narrative, your story. So absolutely include that, because like I said, you never know where those overlaps are. And same thing with volunteer experience or, your hobbies. I mean, it sounds so trite, but, but again, I'll use my son as an example. He got his first summer job because I forced him to do rock climbing. And he ended up being the rock climbing specialist at the camp. And otherwise, he was never going to get that job. And it paid $2 an hour more than the regular counselors, right? But he had that on his resume. And they were like, oh, he's not just a high school kid. He actually knows rock climbing and knows roping and safety and all that stuff. So you never know where those things are going to happen.
Remember, you got to connect those dots for employers, though. You can't expect them to make those connections for you. So I got a question both for Allison and for Jesse, and this is a real sensitive question that some people have posed. There are individuals who have been in an automobile accident, suffered, been recovering from cancer, and are looking to re-enter the workforce. So the nature of their gap is they were sick, and they've come out of that, and now they're ready to get back into the workforce. And that can be really overwhelming and intimidating for them. Have you experienced that? And what advice do you have from the other side of the chair when you've got someone who's skilled, qualified, wants to re-enter the workforce, but is coming out of that? What's going to be a good way for them to share that story in your mind that will help them position themselves well? Because this is a tough one.
I would say,
there you go.
I would say honesty is the key. I believe that that doesn't disqualify you from being disqualified from a position. We are not judging you because you were sick or you were in an automobile accident or something like that. So it is a sensitive topic, absolutely, but candidates should not feel discouraged because of that either. If they're qualified, they're qualified.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'll often coach folks is just being ready to tell that story and what they have been doing to get themselves ready to re-enter the workforce. Sometimes you do need to do a little reskilling. Sometimes it's just simply knowing that you've gotten your stamina up and being able to say, this is a hypothetical, cancer treatment can be really difficult and it can really impact your stamina. But in anticipation of getting back to the workforce, one of the things that I have been doing is walking, and I've got myself up to 10,000 steps a day, and taking care of myself physically is really important if I'm going to bring my whole self to work every day. And I'm really proud to say that I have, I've met my step goal or whatever it happens to be. And there's a lot of pride that's involved in this. I'm going to share a similar story. Actually, this is a young lady that I hired way back in the day. Who I hired for a front desk position when I was working at the University of Texas at Austin. And she shared during her interview, we did not ask, but she shared that while she was a student, she unexpectedly got pregnant. And she dropped out of school. She dropped out of university for 2 years in order to, be there and just be a mom for 2 years. And then came back and finished her degree in 2 years. She had 2 years done, took 2 years off, in 2 years, working part-time, being a mom and doing all of this stuff. And then we hired her. She was fabulous. And after we hired her, we said, okay, so Tawana, tell me about the experience. She goes, I got to be honest with you. I was really nervous telling you that I was a single mom and that I'd been through all of this stuff because I thought it would make you not want me as a candidate. And I said to her, I said, Tawana, you had the qualifications, but that was the differentiator for you. If I wanted someone who was going to be reliable, who I knew was going to show up, who could handle multiple things at the same time, I realized I was talking to someone who was balancing a full-time course load, an infant toddler child, and 2 part-time jobs to make her way through school, and she did that efficiently. That was something that differentiated you from all of the other candidates. So sometimes it's this imposter syndrome that we have to get over that is very real and sometimes perceived in understanding how we can more effectively tell our story. And that's where career coaches can really be of great assistance. There's another good question that's along this related topic about justice impacted candidates as well. And I don't know, Allison or Jesse, if you are recruiting for roles where folks coming out of incarceration who've been rehabilitated, trying to enter the workforce are eligible, how do you all vet? I know how I coach them. How do you vet those kinds of candidates, and what sorts of questions do you have to identify them as qualified for jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I can say, I mean, I've certainly encountered those things, and I mean, there's two pieces, right? I mean, there's certainly the legal aspects, right? There are
Yeah.
certain, you know, job locations. For example, if you're dealing with vulnerable people, like you're by law prohibited from working at certain locations, right? So as job coaches, being able to prepare, those individuals to say like, hey, maybe you can't apply to that job because you're it's a do not pass go with that conviction. You cannot be there. But that said, there's also as you're talking about, your candidate. I think most recruiters and most HR folks recognize that, like, if someone ends up, when you do that background check and they have a record, that's where the conversation starts, and you have to have that conversation. And I've had conversations, for example, a gentleman who had a conviction and was served a lot of time. For basically what amounted to a bar fight that went wrong, right? He was a young man, got into a bar fight, and tragically the person that he was fighting with fell, hit their head, and had such a severe head injury that they died. Now, this was, a thing that happened to both individuals. That he was 19 years old. He was a baby. And I'm having this conversation now with a man who served 20 years. And I'm like, well, what now? Like, and I was like, well, and to your point, like, what have you learned? What did you learn? What do you want to do differently? What are your aspirations? And now this was, went from a baby who was incarcerated to an adult man who was very, introspective about his life. And of course I gave him the job because he wasn't that same person. And that's, I think, part of that process, which is, being able to have that conversation, coaching your folks to say, like, look, you have to be honest, like maybe not a great term, but the come to Jesus moment. Like, you got to be honest about what you did, but more importantly, where you're going from here. And I think that's the biggest part, because there are people that I've encountered that did not have that attitude, and they were very cavalier about, oh, it was just such and such, right? And it's like, no, that's because that, again, who are you today is what matters to me, and where are you going, and what's your aspiration. So I think that's the important part, to coach your people to be able to have those conversations and know what the employer is looking for.
Jesse, anything else that you would want to share on that topic?
I would have to agree with Allison, but I also have to be very honest. Being in a trauma one hospital, I really, not saying that we don't have candidates under that situation, I just haven't came across it, honestly, to have that conversation. We do run a very strict boat here, so it's really, there's no gray area with these things. It's either a yes or no. But what I would, if I was to be put in that situation, what I would encourage candidates that are under that kind of situation is that know what you're applying to. So what I mean by that is, don't, obviously, if you committed a crime, whatever the crime is, know your crime, and then know what job you're able to apply for, because there are going to be certain jobs that you can apply for. But if you had a violent charge, and it could have been something that, like Allison said, where that happened and the gentleman fell and hit his head and passed away, doesn't necessarily mean that he pulled the trigger. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot of different situations with just know your charge and know where you're applying to. It's just not a hard no.
Really important question, I think, for us to wrap on. I did just drop some resources into the chat. About a year or so ago, in partnership with WPCCN, we hosted a webinar on getting a fair chance, strategies for job seekers with criminal records, and I dropped the link to the recording in there as well. We also did one in that same year on strategies for job seekers with disabilities, because that can be very, very challenging as well. These are recorded webinars. We do 3 live webinars a month. They're all free through the Job Search Academy. We actually have one coming up this afternoon. So if you've got more time for professional development, we've got a webinar on building and activating your network that is coming up. And if you can't, you can still watch the recording again later. And I put in the link to our live webinars page so you can see the stuff that is always upcoming. Folks, this has been fun. It's been interesting. I think it's been informative. Allison and Jesse, you have made fabulous guests. You've offered some great insights from your worlds and from your experience, great advice, tips. Thank you so much. This has been great fun. Sherry, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Can I just
yes.
make a quick
Yes.
like, I know there's a lot of folks in the room that do have candidates. If you have people that you really feel strongly about and that are looking for a job, I can never make promises that I'll give them a job, but I always promise I'll at least give them a fair shot, and see what I might have. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat. So if you have resumes that you want to send my way, I'm happy to take a look at them.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming, and we will be creating a 1 to 2 pager synopsis of this meeting, and also giving you the link to all the resources that were posted in the chat. If there's a need to do a follow-up, if you feel like your questions were not answered, we're certainly willing to do that. And I thank everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, our panelists. You guys did a great job. I really appreciate all that you did to prepare for this.
Thank you guys for having me.
Cheers all. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Have a great
thank
day.
you. Okay. Take care, everyone.